Yep, right in there. There she goes. There we go. What's going on, guys? So, doing some work on my 2005 Ford F-150. Truck has almost 170,000 miles on it. I've been plowing for the past 6 years. Lower ball joints are loose. It's time to replace them. So that's going to be what I'm mainly going to be focusing on today, which I'll show you how to do that. Not too hard. It's just going to take some time. You got to take a lot of parts apart. And you also need a ball joint press, which I bought mine on Amazon, 50 bucks. You'll see that in a little while. But in addition to that, I'm also having another problem. Now, I'm going to focus mainly on replacing the ball joints, and you'll learn a little bit about this issue, but I'm going to focus this issue in another video. And that issue is about 6 years ago, when I started plowing with this, I had a 3-inch leveling kit installed. It's just a strut spacer, so it's just a little steel block that goes on top of the struts, and it raises the front end up. And I'm having two issues with that. One, the angle of the CV shaft after I had the leveling kit installed is so steep that I keep tearing the boots. And after the boots on the CV shafts blow, then grease gets everywhere, and then the universal joints in the CV shafts, you know, they wear out much faster. So yeah, I need to lower that. And second, I'm having a clearance issue between my upper control arm and my struts, the spring on my strut. And I've been hearing this sound for the longest time, and I just finally figured it out that the upper control arm and the spring on the strut are hitting. So that's another reason why I'm lowering it down to 1.5 inches. So first thing you got to do is obviously jack up your truck, jack stands of course, have the tires blocked, and you need to remove the hubcaps and then take the tires off. So I'm going to go do that now, and then we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing we need to remove is our caliper. So you can either remove the caliper and then the caliper bracket, or you can just remove the caliper bracket, which is just going to be a little bit trickier getting that off. And there are two 18mm bolts right back here. Here's the first bolt, and the second bolt is going to be down in here. Probably going to need a breaker bar. So again, you want to keep your caliper held up so that way it's not hanging off the brake line, and for that I just have this simple hook which I'm going to hang in this hole that I already have on my frame. Okay, and I'm going to fully support the weight of this caliper and caliper bracket. I'm just going to find a place for it to hook. I'm going to use the bolt hole on it. So now that caliper is out of the way and it's suspended, so no damage is being done to it. Now we can remove the brake rotor, which my brake rotors are on here loose. If they aren't loose, you may have to tap this with a hammer. Comes off like so. Okay, so now I'm going to take off this CV axle cap, which you can take a pair of channel locks and wiggle it back and forth, and that seems to work pretty good for me. I'm sure I got you on camera, so you're going to remove that. And then you need to remove your CV axle nut. Shouldn't take much to get this off. I believe the torque spec on this nut is only 20 pounds, so just try and remember that for when you're installing it. Okay. Next thing I'm going to remove, I'm just going to take this line out of its little alcove holder there. I'm also going to pull out this vacuum line right here. So this vacuum line simply pulls out, and there's two nipples on there. So I'm going to cover those nipples up with a piece of tape. That way while I'm doing the work on this, nothing goes in those two ports. So next I need to remove my steering tie rod end, and this is held on here with a castle nut, and there is also a cotter pin which goes through here. So I bent back the cotter pin tabs with my needle nose inside the loop of the cotter pin. I'm going to take a hammer, just hammer that out of there like so. Take my 21mm socket and loosen that up. I just put these in, so these aren't going to be in here that much, but just to kind of get it out of there a little bit, I'm going to tap on the side there, and then with the nut up top like I have, I'm going to lightly tap it out like that so you don't do any damage. Take your time, small hits, unless you plan to replace your tie rod end, then you do whatever the hell you want to it. Okay, next I need to remove the nut on this upper control arm ball joint. So what I'm gonna do is take a wire brush, just get any kind of loose stuff I can get on these threads, which this brush really is too big to get in here, but I'm gonna do what I can. So I got a little bit on that side, so now I'm gonna take my penetrating oil, which I probably should have sprayed these a while ago, but this should help us get this off a little bit better. While I'm at it, I'm gonna spray any other nuts that I gotta take off. So now I'm gonna take my 21mm socket, get in here with the breaker bar, try and break this loose. Okay, so I've put on a pair of safety glasses and some hearing protectors, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna take a mallet, hit on here a couple times, try and just break that loose, and then if it doesn't fall on its own, then I'm gonna hammer here a couple times, and we'll see if we can get her loose. Alright, just like that. And I think I mentioned you want to keep this nut on here a little bit, so that way when it falls, then you can, you know, the nut catches it as opposed to it just collapsing. This jack is also supporting this whole A-arm, so if it does fall, the jack will catch it. I probably should have done this a little bit earlier, but no problem doing it now. So I'm going to twist this CV nut back on here, and I'm just going to hit that through a little bit, just to kind of make sure that the CV axle is able to come out of here okay, which came out pretty easy, so I'm not too concerned there. So again, I do have the jack supporting this. Really isn't too much spring on that right now, so I'm going to try and take this nut off here the rest of the way. Which, you see how this is spinning? So what I'm going to do is take a pair of vice grips, clamp it up here, and spin it off the rest of the way. Now, normally, there is a spot on this ball joint where you can put like a 10mm wrench and hold it from the bottom, but I don't know if you can see, but the portion where I could grab this main shaft with the 10mm is buried by the nut, so the only choice really is to take a pair of vice grip pliers like so. Clamp it down firm. I'm not killing the thing though. And just get ready because this may spring apart a little bit. Yeah, just like that. Okay, so now I need to remove this lower ball joint nut right here, and this is going to be a 24mm. That wasn't too bad at all. Okay, so with this lower ball joint nut, again, you don't want to take it off all the way. You want to leave it on there just a little bit, so that way when we hit on this and break this lower ball joint loose, that way this whole steering component catches and it doesn't just fall. There she goes. Okay, so now I'm going to remove this lower ball joint nut off the rest of the way. Now, some people decide to remove this line. I mean, it's really not necessary, in my opinion, that you remove it. You just have to be very mindful of it. So what's going to happen after I remove this nut, I'm going to be ready to support this thing's weight fully. I'm going to lift it up, I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, and I'm just going to lean it kind of right next to the brake rotor. Okay, so I got the weight of this, and just making sure that I'm not going to put any strain on this line, which is a little bit on it. Let me take it off this holder up here. There we go. Okay, now there is literally no strain on that line. You can hear how worn out this lower ball joint is. Yep, definitely time for new ball joints. Okay, so in this part of the video, I'm going to begin correcting my leveling issue, in which I'm going to change this from a 3-inch leveling kit to 1.5 inches. So if you're only interested in the ball joints, feel free to skip ahead. Also, while I was under here, I realized that I have bad steering stabilizer links, so I'm also going to be replacing them, but they're going to be a little bit later on in the video. But as for correcting my leveling issue, first thing I need to do is remove this strut, and that starts with removing this bottom bolt, which this is a 30 millimeter. Okay, alright. Okay, so on top of the strut, there's going to be 3 bolts, 2 in the front and then 1 in the back up in there, which you may find it easier to access that through the engine compartment with a socket extension, which these are not the most fun to take off because you can't really fit a socket in there too well. You need a deep socket because of the length of the bolt. I mean, you could remove the fender well, but not really worth it in my opinion. So I'm going to take these off. There's just nuts up top you got to take off. And so I actually figured out a little trick. If you take a deep socket and put it up here to kind of hold the fender well up, then you can get another deep socket in here somewhat comfortably. By the way, this is 11/16 inch nuts up here. So this is actually working pretty well. Okay, so now I need to take this lower strut bolt out. And I've tried to make sure that there's, you know, no tension on this with the jack. So, best way to do this in my opinion, just make sure that it's unloaded. Throw some safety glasses on, spin the nut on there a little bit. Start having it come out under its own power. Or well, you know what I mean. Like that. Now you can take a pry bar. Come on! Okay, there we go. So now, this strut should be ready to come out of here, which you may need to take a pry bar and work it out some way. Like so. Get ready to catch it. And there's your strut assembly. Okay, so as I was trying to explain in the beginning of this video, here is the leveling kit, and it's just this little piece right here, and it's basically, like I mentioned earlier, a spacer that goes on top of the strut. This one gives me 3 inches, and here's the new one, which is a little bit smaller than 3 inch, maybe by, you know, a ½ inch or so, maybe a little bit more than a ½ inch, and this one's going to give me 1.5 inches of level in the front of the truck. Now, you're probably asking, why isn't this 3 inches and why isn't this 1.5 inches? Well, I can't really explain it too well, but, you know, as long as I'm being completely honest that I can't explain it too well, what happens is, as, you know, you get higher up here, the more the lift is magnified. So, you know, this will give you 3 inches and this will give you 1.5 inches. So that's the best I can explain it. So what I need to do now is unbolt this off the old one, and then I need to bolt on the new one, and then we can reinstall the strut. Okay, so before I put my new strut in, it's going to be much easier if I take out the CV axle now. So this is a 12 millimeter socket, and I got the other side of the truck locked up, which I'll show you how in the video right now, but got to break all these loose. There's the old CV axle. So I told you my steering stabilizer links are bad, and you're going to hear the sound right now of a bad steering stabilizer link. Yep, right in there. Big time. So I'm going to have to remove this bolt. There's a bolt underneath as well, so I'm going to get my wire brush yet again. Clean off any loose rust. Try not to damage those other lines in the background there. Make sure there's no tension on them still, which there's not. It's going to be an 18. I think I can go this way. So I told you it was spinning, and this is what I mean by it spinning. When I try and take off this nut, the whole thing spins. So again, what you need, an 18 mil, and this is an 8 mil. So put the 8 mil right here. There we go. Safety glasses and hearing protection. There she goes. Out with the old. And in with the new. Okay, so now I'm going to start removing this lower ball joint. So you're going to want to have some safety glasses on for this. So I'm just going to clean this area up a little bit first with a small wire brush. And the first thing I'm going to do here is take off this snap ring. So you want to have yourself a pair of snap ring pliers, safety glasses in case this thing pops, which it didn't. Put that off to the side. I bought the Motorcraft ball joints. Just figured that was an OEM part that I felt like was worth investing in, because the original ones, the original Motorcraft lower ball joints, ended up lasting 165,000 miles, so that's not bad. So again, I have safety glasses on. I'm going to throw on some hearing protectors, and what I'm going to do now is shock this. So I'm going to try and just break the bond that this ball joint has with this, I guess call this a lower control arm. So I'm going to mallet. I also have this lower control arm supported with a jack. You don't have a jack or a jack stand supporting this. When you hit this, most likely it'll just bounce back and forth. So you want something underneath here supporting this. So I'm going to give it a couple whacks. Now if you look down here, you can see that the ball joint got separated just a little bit, which that's what you want. And now I'm going to get my ball joint press, and we're going to press this thing out of here. Okay, so I got my ball joint press right beneath the camera here. So the first thing you want to do is find a piece of pipe that is bigger than the boot on the lower ball joint. So this is the closest one I could find that was large enough. Next thing you want to do is you want to take this piece. You see there's rings on one side, and the other side's just there's not as many steps. You know, this kind of looks like a quarry, and this is designed for the pipe to fit on here like so. So that's how that's going to go. It's going to sit like that. And the next thing we're going to do is take our big clamp, I guess you could call it. We're going to start getting this tight. Okay, so I have the main body of this press pressed up against the right side of the main line, or the clockwise side, because when I start cranking on this thing, this C-clamp is going to want to rotate this way. I'm going to take a little bit of fine grit sandpaper. Just clean up any burrs if there are any, which there's really not. So you don't want to take much off. If any, you're really just trying to knock off anything that may bind this new ball joint from going in. Okay, so again, I did decide to buy the OEM Motorcraft lower ball joints, and it is kind of nice. They come with a set of instructions. They come with a new snap ring, and they also come with this retaining compound. So what you're going to do with this is, the instructions say to use the whole bottle, so you want to coat the inside where this lower ball joint's going to go, and you also want to coat the lower ball joint as well. And again, they want you to use this whole thing. As you can see, my lower ball joint is frosty because I left it in the freezer overnight, so try not to get my fingers stuck to this. I also like that they have this protective plastic cap, which literally unthreads, and that just protects the threads when they're moving the part around. So okay, so to reinstall it, you want to find a piece of pipe that just rests on this lip, this metal lip here. You don't want anything that's going to be pinching the boot there. And take your cap with the ridges in it, insert it like so. And because this is cold, this may get started in here a little bit, which it did, which that's going to help us out. Now I'm going to take this cap, which This is kind of like a hollow cap. I'm going to put this over the top, careful to make sure that it's perfectly centered. Hold that like so, start twisting on this. Alright, now we can start tightening this thing up and ball joint will slowly be pressed in. So I got the new snap ring, put it on my snap ring pliers. Which these snap ring pliers really are a little bit small for this. They don't really spread as much as I'd like them to, but they work. Start at one side, work the other side in. Alright, and that is how you install a lower ball joint. So now I'm getting ready to install my remanufactured CV axle, and what I'm going to do is, I'm not doing this with everything I thread, but I like to do it for my CV axles. I'm taking a little bit of thread locker, or Locktite. It's off-brand Locktite. I'm just putting it in these machined holes for where the CV axle bolts are going to go through, and that's just going to make sure that those bolts never come undone. So I'm going to get the remanufactured CV shaft or axle, whatever you want to call it, and we'll bolt that in. I don't know what the specific torque spec is for these. If you want, you can do your own research on that, but I'm just giving all these a good crank with my breaker bar, and I have not had a problem, and I've done this once before, so again, completely up to you, but this is how I'm doing it. Alright, here's another thing for anybody that wants to do a leveling kit. You may have clearance issues with your strut and your CV axle boot. So I'm talking about, this is your CV axle boot and this is your strut. As you can see, they are really close, if not touching right now. So what I've done is I've actually taken my angle grinder and I've ground down a bit of this strut right here. And also another reason why they're pretty close right now is because this front suspension is not, you know, under any load right now. It's just hanging. All the weight of the truck is being held by this jack stand right now, so when I do lower this back on the ground, we should be okay. But yeah, that's just another thing you want to watch for. Okay, so the passenger side has been done since yesterday. I just dry fit the driver's side, and I should be okay on clearance, but you know what, just for a little bit peace of mind, obviously, I'm going to put a 45-degree bevel on this in between these two marks, and I did dry fit this just to make sure, you know, I'm just going to grind down in the right spot. And you know what, if you grind down a little bit right here, it's not going to hurt the integrity because you're going to have so much more of this strut to hold this spring. So yeah. Next, I'm going to reinstall my strut. Pry bar is definitely the right tool to have for this job. Thread lock is probably the more appropriate way to go here, but you know, to each his own. Just gonna crank this thing down pretty good, and if you do decide to put anti-seize on here, well, it's gonna make your job a bit easier in the future if you ever got to take this apart again, which chances are you're probably gonna be the next one to do this job again. But anyway, another smart way you can do it is you can do thread locker just where the nut's gonna be, and after you tighten down the nut, you can put anti-seize on the rest of the threads, so that way they have some rust protection on there. But again, completely up to you. Really not much going on up here. It's just you got to put a washer down and you put your nut on, and then you tighten it down, and you do this 3 times. Okay, so the top 3 nuts on this strut are all tightened down. Yep, there is a lot of torque on that. Let's say I weigh around 150. This is a 2-foot bar, so every pound is multiplied by 2. I probably put about 300 foot-pounds of torque on that. So I probably over-torqued that a little bit. No big deal. Nothing snapped. Okay, so now, I think what we need to do next. I'm going to take off this nut that came with my remanufactured CV axle. Next thing I'm going to do is get a rag, and I'm going to clean in here, and I'm going to repack this with grease. I did get some rust particles in there. So yeah, I'm going to have to do a really good job of cleaning that out. So this bearing is just a little bit rough for my taste. I ended up replacing the passenger side maybe 2 years ago, and when I bought the part for the passenger side, for some reason I bought one for the driver's side, so it looks like I'm gonna put in the new hub and bearing assembly on the driver's side, so that'll also be included in this video. Okay, so here's the new hub. The reason I installed just the passenger side at the time was that was the only one that was bad, and figured it didn't make sense to replace the driver's side if it didn't need it, so here we are. $250 part. Glad I didn't have to spend extra money on it. These are Motorcraft, I guess you call them wheel bearings and hub assemblies. So this is your ABS line, and it runs up through the engine compartment, which that is, let me show you. It is that line right there. So I'm going to go up in the engine and see if I can figure out where that gets disconnected from. So that was actually really simple to disconnect. The connection for this ABS line is literally right here on the other side of the fender, or fender well, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to pull this aside, then I got to get some big wrench and try and remove these bolts off this thing. Okay, these are 18mm bolts, so get my breaker bar ready to go. But before I do that, I'm going to take a hammer and just give each one of these bolts a good tap. Hopefully that shock will help break them loose. They're seized on there a little bit. Okay, there's one. Yep. I love this thing. There we go. So I'm going to throw my gloves back on, get some shop towels and clean that out. Okay, so I ended up taking this part out, which I cleaned it out to the best of my ability, and I checked this in all directions, and there's only one way that this thing can go back in here, which that's like so. Which, you know what, it's a good idea to put some grease around this thing, so I think I'm going to do that. And as for the grease I'm going to be using to repack this thing, it's just some good old high temperature disc drum brake wheel bearing grease. What I do, I end up keeping a glove in there, so that way every time I need some I don't have to break out a new set of gloves. Make sure I put this in here the right way. It is it that way? I think it's that way, yep. We're going to throw some more high temperature bearing grease in here. I'm going to pack this thing pretty good. In my opinion, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit extra. I'm just going to pack this a little bit. When I put the CV axle, I'm going to have to come back in here and pack this one more time. Whatever I missed, of course, around the splines of the CV axle. So I'm just trying to get in any cracks and voids and just get a overall good dosage of grease. There's a little cutout right here, so we're going to put this in where the ABS line is going to go right through that cutout right there, and where the ABS line does go through that cutout, there's this grommet right here, so we'll just make sure that that's properly seated very carefully. I felt it drop in. You may have to spin it a little bit till it engages. Wheel bearing in here ready to go, so I'm going to lift this part up and I'm going to slide in the lower ball joint while I'm holding it up. I need to put the nut on the bottom. Yeah, so I got to grease the splines on this CV axle, and then I'm going to insert it into the Neo wheel bearing hub. I'm pretty certain only 20 foot-pounds on this nut. That's 20 foot-pounds right there. Now, what I need to do is I need to connect this front ball joint, which I'm not going to tighten that up yet. So I'm going to connect that tie rod end for the steering, and then I need to connect the upper control arm, this ball joint right here. So let me get those two in. Okay, so I have everything tightened down, the upper ball joint, the lower ball joint, and the tie rod end. Now what I need to do is I need to reroute this ABS line. I need to replug this into the connector up in the fender well there in the engine compartment. And then after that I need to put the brake disc on, and then I need to put the caliper on, tighten everything down, and put tires on, and that will be it. Also, don't want to forget that you need to reinstall your vacuum line. Make sure it's clean. And I put a piece of tape for the vacuum line nipples, so I need to remove that tape and then slide this back on there as well. Okay, all the components are installed, everything's torqued down. I reinstalled all those wires there. Well, there's the vacuum line in there, and your ABS line, and then that's your brake line, this hard line right here, which that's how everything's supposed to look. And yeah. So I'm ready to put the tires on, and the only thing I'm going to have to do after this, which is not going to be included in this video, is because I lowered this 1.5 inches in the front, I am going to need to do a, an alignment at some point, which I'll probably do that tomorrow, which I have done a video of that in the past, which I will post after this. But if you're interested in any of the tools you saw in this video, check the links in the description below. Especially I'll include that ball joint press. Such a handy tool, I can't recommend that enough, and I love my little Makita impact driver. This thing is incredible, so I'll definitely include those tools below. But anyway, that is the end of this repair. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and hey, subscribe for more.